I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rhythmic ticking of the large wooden clock in your grandfather's salon. Or maybe it is the distinct, heavy sound of the tramway gliding through the streets of Alexandria, mixing with the salty smell of the Mediterranean Sea. Do you feel that sudden warmth in your chest? Today we are going to travel back to the 1960s and 70s in Egypt. We are going to open a dusty album of memories and rediscover 20 beautiful, everyday rituals that we have somehow left behind. We will remember how our homes smelled, how we connected with our neighbors, and how the simplest things brought us immense joy. And please, stay with me until the very end, because our final memory is about the warm summer nights on the rooftop, a truly magical experience that I am sure you missed just as much as I do. It is fascinating to think about how differently time used to flow back then. In the 1960s and 70s, time was not something we constantly chased. It was something we lived within, patiently and gracefully. We did not have the internet or smartphones to give us instant gratification. Instead, we had the beautiful art of waiting. We waited weeks for a letter to arrive in the mail, tracing the handwriting on the envelope with our fingers. We waited all week for our favorite television show or a radio broadcast, and that anticipation made the experience incredibly sweet. People today might think that living without modern technology meant our lives were somehow poorer or emptier. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were endlessly richer in sincerity, in deep emotional connections, and in the sheer presence we gave to one another. We looked each other in the eye. We knew the names of everyone in our neighborhood. Every small object had a story, and every daily chore was a ritual that bound families together. Let us step back into that slower, kinder world. Let us begin by remembering the profound stillness that would descend upon the bustling streets of Cairo and Alexandria on the first Thursday evening of every single month. The entire nation would seemingly hold its breath, united by a single glowing wooden box in the center of the living room. It was the night of Kulthum. You can probably still picture the warm, amber light emanating from the dial of the large radio. The adults would arrange the chairs in a semicircle, their faces reflecting a mixture of deep reverence and anticipation. Someone would bring out small, delicate glasses of dark, sweet tea on a silver tray, the clinking of spoons against glass providing a gentle prelude to the main event. When the majestic voice of the Star of the East finally emerged through the crackling static, singing of love and longing, time itself seemed to freeze. You would sit on the patterned carpet, perhaps not fully understanding the profound lyrics as a child, but deeply feeling the emotional weight of the room. It was not just a musical performance. It was a sacred, monthly ritual of collective emotion, a shared heartbeat of a country that brought families and neighbors together in a way that modern entertainment can never replicate. And now, let us transition from the late night to the very early morning. Think about the crisp, cool air of dawn and the sound of wooden wheels rolling over the asphalt. It was the neighborhood bean cart, the fawwal, setting up his station. You were probably sent down by your mother, holding a clean glass jar or a deep ceramic bowl from your own kitchen. You would join the small line of neighbors in their pajamas, greeting each other softly in the morning mist. The large, glowing brass pot sitting over the low fire looked like a treasure chest. When the fawwal lifted the heavy lid, a thick cloud of steam would billow out, carrying the earthy, comforting aroma of slow-cooked fava beans mixed with a touch of garlic and lemon. He would expertly ladle the beans into your jar, perhaps adding a generous splash of hot oil, a pinch of cumin, and a dash of chili if your father requested it. Walking back up the stairs to your apartment, feeling the warmth of the glass jar against your chest, you knew that a perfect family breakfast was about to begin. It was a daily ritual of trust and community, a simple meal that tasted infinitely better because it was shared. Do you recall the hypnotic rhythm of the local ironing shop? The makwa regal, or the foot ironer, was a true artisan of the neighborhood. Walking past his open shop door, you would be struck by the intense heat and the unmistakable scent of scorched cotton and damp fabric. Inside stood a strong man, balancing expertly on a massive, heavy cast-iron block. He did not use his hands to iron the clothes. Instead, he used his right foot, grasping the wooden handle with his toes, pressing the heavy, heated metal back and forth over trousers and galabeas with a graceful, almost mesmerizing dance. The most magical part for us as children was watching him fill his mouth with water from a small cup, then suddenly spray it out in a fine, perfect mist over the dry clothes. The hiss of the steam rising from the fabric was an unforgettable sound. You would stand there, holding a freshly washed shirt, mesmerized by his balance and skill. Those perfectly pressed collars and sharp creases were a matter of intense personal pride for the men of that era, achieved not by electricity, but by sheer human strength and a beautifully mastered craft. Let us drift away to the magic of summer holidays in Alexandria. For so many families in the 1960s and 70s, summer was synonymous with the train ride to the coast. Do you remember the moment you first smelled the iodine in the air, knowing the sea was near? The beaches were lined with beautiful, long rows of wooden cabins, painted in bright, cheerful colors, with heavy striped canvas umbrellas swaying in the breeze. There was no need for luxury resorts or expensive tickets. Happiness was simply building sandcastles, feeling the hot Mediterranean sun on your shoulders, and waiting for the wandering vendor calling out for fresca. You would eagerly buy those thin, crispy wafers held together with sweet honey and nuts, wiping the sticky crumbs and sand from your chin. Families would sit closely together on folding wooden chairs, mothers cutting up cold watermelon, fathers reading the daily newspaper, while the sound of the crashing waves drowned out all the worries of the world. It was a time of pure, innocent joy, where a simple wooden cabin by the water felt like a grand palace. Let us think about another morning ritual that has entirely vanished from our lives: the arrival of the milkman. Long before plastic bottles and supermarket cartons, fresh milk was delivered right to your door. You would wake up to the musical, clinking sound of thick glass bottles tapping against each other as he rode his heavy metal bicycle down the street. Your mother would take the fresh milk and pour it into a special aluminum pot to boil it on the stove. This was a critical daily event. You had to stand by the stove and watch it intensely, because the moment you looked away, the milk would suddenly rise, foam over the edge, and hiss onto the open flame. After boiling it safely, the milk was left to cool, forming a thick, glorious layer of rich cream on top. That cream was a prize, carefully collected to make fresh butter or spread on warm bread with a dusting of sugar. It was a pure, unadulterated taste of nature, a slow process that demanded our attention and care, making even a simple glass of warm milk feel like something deeply special. You remember the sheer physical weight of the home telephone? It was usually placed in the hallway, a heavy, solid Bakelite machine that looked like a piece of important furniture. Making a phone call in the 1960s was a deliberate, intentional act. You had to stick your finger into the rotary dial, pull it all the way to the metal stopper, and listen to that satisfying, mechanical whirring sound as it spun back into place for every single digit. We knew the phone numbers of all our aunts, uncles, and best friends by heart, stored in our memory, not in a digital chip. And because international or long-distance calls were incredibly expensive, conversations were meaningful. When the phone rang, the whole house would fall silent. Often, families would put a small brass lock on the dial to prevent children from playing with it and racking up a high bill. If you were allowed to speak to a relative, you had to speak loudly and clearly, holding the heavy receiver with two hands. Those shared family conversations in the hallway, passing the receiver from person to person, made the voices of our loved ones feel so precious and rare. Ah, the sound of the makhrata. If there is one sound that instantly brings back the feeling of an Egyptian home in the 1970s, It is the rapid, rhythmic chopping of the curved, double-handled knife against a wooden board. Making molokhia was not just cooking, it was a performance. You could hear it from the staircase before you even opened the door to your apartment. Your mother or grandmother would sit patiently, rocking the heavy blade back and forth until the green leaves were minced to absolute perfection. But the true magic happened during the final step, the tasha. The smell of pungent garlic and earthy coriander, frying in rich golden ghee, would fill the entire house, making your mouth water instantly. And then came the famous gasp. The cook would dramatically inhale sharply as they poured the sizzling garlic into the bubbling green soup. We believed with all our hearts that this sudden breath was the secret ingredient that made the molokhia taste perfect. It was a beautiful, theatrical moment of culinary love, a dish made with physical effort and deep affection for the family waiting at the dining table. Let us take a walk down to the neighborhood grocer, the Baal. His small shop was a treasure trove of sensory delights. When you walked in, you were instantly greeted by a rich, complex aroma, a mix of hard olive oil soap, strong spices, dried legumes, and aged Rumi cheese. Nothing was prepackaged. If you wanted cheese or halava, the grocer would take a massive block, slice it with a long wire or a sharp knife right in front of you, and carefully weigh it on a brass scale. He would then wrap it masterfully in a piece of thick brown paper, or sometimes yesterday's newspaper, folding the edges into a neat, secure cone. But the most important part of the ball was the large, worn-out ledger book kept on the counter. This book was a symbol of absolute trust. Families bought their daily necessities on credit, and the grocer would simply write the amount down under your father's name, knowing perfectly well he would be paid at the end of the month. It was an economy built entirely on honor, mutual respect, and a deep sense of community that tied the whole street together. Can you feel the chill of a winter evening? As the sun went down and the cold wind swept through the streets, a new comfort would arrive: the sweet potato cart. You could see it from a distance, blowing brightly in the dark, like a small lighthouse. The wooden cart was fitted with a heavy iron oven, filled with glowing red coals. The vendor, wrapped in a heavy wool scarf, would continuously turn the large potatoes, ensuring they were perfectly roasted. The smell of caramelizing natural sugar and slightly charred potato skin was absolutely irresistible. For just a few coins, he would pull out a steaming hot batata, slice it open, and hand it to you wrapped in a scrap of paper. You would hold it tightly in both hands, using it as a pocket heater to warm your freezing fingers before taking that first, heavenly bite. The soft, sweet orange inside melted in your mouth, offering a simple, inexpensive joy that made the harsh winter nights feel incredibly cozy and deeply romantic. Let us recall the music of our youth. Before the digital age, listening to music required true dedication. In the 1960s, we had vinyl records, where you had to carefully place the needle on the spinning black disc, listening to the gentle crackle before Abdel Halim Hafez began to sing. Later came the era of cassette tapes. Do you remember the tactile joy of holding a new tape, unfolding the paper insert to read the lyrics? We loved our music so much that we would listen to our favorite songs over and over again. But batteries for the portable cassette players were expensive and drained quickly. So, we developed a universal skill. We would take a standard hexagonal wooden pencil, insert it into the spool of the cassette, and manually spin the tape to rewind it, saving the precious battery life for the actual listening. It took time and physical effort, but it made us appreciate the music so much more. We knew every word, every pause, and every scratch on those tapes because the music was a physical part of our daily lives. Every residential building in our era had a guardian, but he was so much more than just a security guard. He was the bawab, the doorman. He sat on a large wooden bench, the mastaba, placed right by the main entrance. Dressed in a traditional galabeya, he was the heartbeat of the building. He knew everything about everyone, but in a protective, caring way. If a stranger entered the street, he noticed. If you came home late from school, he would kindly scold you. You would often see him brewing thick, incredibly strong dark tea in a tiny, battered metal pot over a small kerosene stove, pouring it into a small glass cup. He ran errands for the elderly, carried heavy grocery bags for the mothers, and mediated minor disputes between neighbors. He was considered a member of every single family living in that building. When an occasion of joy or sorrow happened, he was the first to offer congratulations or condolences. The profound sense of safety we felt as children was largely because we knew he was always sitting there, watching over us. Let us open the doors to our old classrooms. Education in the 1960s had a distinct texture and smell. Do you remember the wooden desks with the small hole carved into the top corner? That was for the glass inkwell. We did not use convenient plastic ballpoint pens. We used slender wooden pens with metal nibs that we had to dip into the dark blue or black ink. Learning to write was a slow, deliberate exercise in patience. You had to manage the amount of ink carefully so it would not blot on the thick, rough paper of your notebook. Our fingers were almost permanently stained with blue ink, a proud mark of a hard-working student. Above the blackboard, there was almost always a framed portrait of President Gamal Abdel Nasser looking over the classroom. We learned the intricate beauty of Arabic calligraphy, forming each letter with deep respect for the language. The discipline of keeping a clean notebook, despite the messy ink, taught us a level of care and pride in our work that remains deeply ingrained in our generation. Do you remember the thrill of the local neighborhood cinema? We called it the terzo cinema, the third-class seating, but to us, it was pure magic. For a very small amount of pocket money, you could escape into another world for an entire afternoon. The seats were made of hard wood, and the ceiling fans spun lazily above, clicking rhythmically in the warm, smoky air. The floor was almost always covered with the discarded shells of roasted sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds, as the entire audience cracked them continuously throughout the film. It was never a quiet, polite experience. The cinema was alive. When the hero of the film finally defeated the villain, the entire theater would erupt in loud cheers, clapping, and whistling. During the intermission, vendors would walk down the aisles selling glass bottles of local soda like Spiros Bathis, the cold, sweet fizz perfectly cutting through the salty taste of the seeds. It was a communal, noisy, wildly entertaining experience where strangers shared their emotions openly in the dark. Let us talk about a drink that symbolized pure happiness, the pink rose syrup, or sharbat. This was not a beverage you drank casually on a Tuesday afternoon. Sharbat was strictly reserved for moments of profound celebration. You would see it served when a family celebrated an engagement, a wedding, the safe birth of a new baby, or when a student successfully passed their high school exams. Your mother would bring out the special set of heavy crystal glasses that were usually kept locked away in the salon cabinet, meant only for honored guests. The thick, vibrant pink syrup was carefully mixed with ice-cold water, creating a sweet, intensely floral aroma that filled the room. Drinking it felt incredibly special, a literal taste of triumph and joy. The vibrant pink color against the sparkling crystal glass looked so beautiful. Just the sight of a tray full of sharbat glasses being carried into a room was enough to make everyone smile, knowing that wonderful news had just arrived. Let us step out into the streets, where the true energy of our childhood lived. Long before video games, our entertainment was entirely physical and incredibly inventive. Do you remember the plastic football? We called it the Kora Nylon. It was incredibly light, brightly colored, and cost almost nothing. The dusty street outside our apartment buildings transformed into a grand, imaginative stadium. We used 2 large rocks to mark the goalposts, and the neighborhood boys would play fiercely for hours on end. If a car occasionally drove by, the game would pause, and then immediately resume. The plastic ball would often bounce off walls, hit balconies, or get stuck under parked cars. We played until the sun went down and the dim yellow streetlights flickered on. The game only truly ended when mothers started calling out our names from the balconies above, signaling that dinner was ready. We would walk upstairs, covered in dust, our knees scraped, but our hearts bursting with the pure, unadulterated joy of unstructured, unsupervised play. Now, let us turn our minds to the holy month of Ramadan. But not the Ramadan of bright television shows and lavish buffet tents. I want you to remember the deep, spiritual quiet of the night, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the Mesaharati. Hours before dawn, while the world was wrapped in deep sleep, you would hear the steady, echoing tap of his small leather drum. Boom, tap, tap, boom. He walked slowly through the dark streets, often holding a simple lantern. The most magical part was that he knew all our names. Hearing his rough, melodic voice, calling out your specific name, urging you to wake up and eat your suhoor before the fast began, made you feel deeply seen and cherished by the community. You would run to the balcony, rubbing your sleepy eyes, just to catch a glimpse of him passing by in the shadows. He was a humble man performing a sacred duty, weaving the entire neighborhood together in a shared spiritual bond, making the holy month feel incredibly intimate and personal. Do you remember the sacred hour of 8 o'clock in the evening? This was when the television, sitting proudly on a dedicated wooden stand, commanded the attention of the entire household. It was a black and white screen, and we only had 2 channels to choose from. Getting a clear picture often required a family member to go up to the roof and physically twist the metal antenna, shouting down to the balcony to ask if the static had cleared. But when the daily Egyptian serial began, absolute silence fell over the living room. Fathers, mothers, and children sat together, entirely captivated by the gripping dramas of the time. There was no pausing, no recording, and no watching it later. You had to be there in the moment. The stories were discussed passionately the next day at school and at work. And when midnight approached, the national anthem would play, the broadcast would officially end, and the screen would shrink down to a single, glowing white dot before fading into blackness, telling us all it was time to rest. Let us inhale deeply and remember the intricate ritual of brewing Turkish coffee on a spirit stove, the sotareya. This was usually the domain of the father or the grandfather. Making coffee was never rushed. It was a meditative process. The small brass pot, the kanaka, was filled with cold water, fine coffee powder, and sugar. It was then placed over the gentle blue flame of the spirit lamp. The room would slowly fill with the rich, intoxicating scent of roasted coffee beans and crushed cardamom. The key to perfection was patience. You had to watch the dark liquid intensely, waiting for the exact moment when the thick, creamy foam, the wesh, began to rise but did not boil over. The maker would carefully pour the foam into small, delicate porcelain cups before returning the pot to the flame for a few more seconds. Drink this coffee was a moment of quiet reflection, a slow sip of tradition that anchored the afternoon, providing a peaceful pause in the middle of a busy day. Think about the gentle, swaying journey on the city tramway. Whether you were traversing the historic streets of Heliopolis in Cairo or riding along the breathtaking Corniche in Alexandria, the tram was a symbol of our youth. The carriages were a beautiful mix of polished wood and green metal. But the most memorable detail was the ticket conductor. He moved through the crowded carriage with remarkable agility, holding a heavy metal hole puncher. The rapid, clicking sound of his puncher as he validated the tiny paper tickets was the soundtrack of the journey. You could stand by the open windows, leaning out slightly to catch the cool breeze against your face, holding onto the thick leather straps hanging from the ceiling as the tram took wide turns. It was slow transportation, but it allowed you to actually see the city, to watch the street vendors, the pedestrians, and the beautiful architecture glide by like a moving cinematic film of everyday Egyptian life. And finally, we arrive at my absolute favorite memory. Sleeping on the rooftop, the South, during the peak of the hot summer. Before air conditioning became common, the apartments would hold the intense heat of the day. So, as the evening approached, families would carry buckets of water up to the flat, concrete roof, splashing it across the floor to cool the surface. Then came the heavy cotton mattresses and clean white sheets. The rooftop was an entire ecosystem. During the day, it was for hanging laundry and raising pigeons, but at night, it became our bedroom. You would lie on your back, feeling the cool night breeze finally arrive. You would stare up at the vast, clear sky, counting the bright stars, listening to the muffled sounds of a neighbor's radio playing a late-night concert, and hearing the distant hum of the city. We were outside, exposed to the night, yet we felt perfectly, unconditionally safe. Surrounded by our siblings and parents, drifting to sleep under the vast Egyptian sky, it was a profound feeling of peace that is almost impossible to find today. When we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes clear that we do not just miss the objects themselves. We do not just miss the heavy telephones or the glass milk bottles. What we truly miss is the version of ourselves that existed back then. We miss the slow pace of life that allowed us to appreciate every single moment. We miss the deep, unbreakable connections we had with our neighbors and the comforting presence of our parents and grandparents. We miss the innocence, the patience, and the profound emotional wealth of a time when the world felt smaller, kinder, and infinitely more human. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like, so we can continue to preserve these beautiful memories together. Now I want to ask you, my dear friend, out of all the memories we talked about today, which one made your heart beat the fastest? Was it the radio, the cinema, or perhaps sleeping on the roof? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. I promise to read them all.